welcome everyone to the Global Counterterrorism Institute series. This is our webinar series on countering terrorism and countering violent extremism. We also have done series in the past on anti-money laundering and countering terrorism financing. This series in particular was set to hold a panel discussion on the topic of emerging challenges and trends in Sahel and Africa and counting terrorism. However, we've changed that to emerging methodologies and trends of the Sahel and Africa and counting terrorism. And so this was done following a study that was published by the NATO Southern Hub in coordination with entities with experience in African terrorist groups. They published the studies that brought local and regional perspectives that could serve to support the development of knowledge regarding terrorism. In that discussion, it was Mr. Arthur Lucas da Silva, which I'd like to point out. In one of his posts that research and analysis works best, it contributes to the decision-making process that we mentioned earlier. However, the subject of terrorism will never be well understood. We aim to change that with a little education. Depending on regional context, its evolution and factors always lead us to know a little bit more about terrorism. So the Global Counterterrorism Institute organization would like to invite everyone in this panel discussion. We have brought together experts with one in particular from the NATO Southern Hub, who also was part of the significant study that was done, that was published, that we're focusing on. So we've requested Dr. Kunle Olawunmi of Nigeria, the International Senior Program Director, as well as Mr. Royce de Melo of Canada, a subject matter expert of Middle East and Africa analyst and historian on terrorism and conflict, as well as Mr. Irfan of the Afghan Security Institute, who is also a research fellow at Global Counterterrorism Institute. They will join this panel to bring a robust discussion together. So at this time, I'd like to welcome all of our guests in the audience today. We do have a special guest from the NATO Southern Hub, Major Cristian Aanei. And at this time, I'm going to read his bio, and he will present on the report titled Facts and Figures, and that is Terrorism in the Sahel. Major Aanei is an analyst at the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub and an active duty officer in the Romanian military. During the last 3 years, his work has been focused on studying conflict dynamics and instability in the Sahel. He has co-authored 3 editions of a joint research project between the African Center for the Study and Research of Terrorism of the African Union and the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub, Terrorism in the Sahel, Facts and Figures. Recently, he led the Hub's analytical efforts regarding the conflict between Al-Qaeda and Daesh, affiliated groups in the Central Sahel, which the findings been captured in the research paper, Mapping the Terrorist Threat in the South, case study, rivalry and confrontation among Sahelian terrorist groups. He has a degree in organizational management and a master's in international relations and security systems. He has extensive field experience working in the terrorist environment, much of which was gained during his 3 operational tours in Afghanistan between 2006 and 2000. All righty, thank you.
Okay.
So Major Aanei, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation. The floor is yours, sir.
Buonasera da Napoli. Good evening from Naples, Italy. Thank you very much, Mr. Price, for the invitation and for your kind introduction. I'm happy to be here to represent the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub and to present this report about the terrorist trends in the Sahel. I hope you'll find it interesting, and I hope that the findings in the report will provide for some interesting discussion later on. Before moving forward, please allow me a few seconds to share my screen and my presentation.
Sure.
Are you able to see?
Yes, sir.
Okay, move forward. Okay. With your permission, I will start my intervention by saying a few words about the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub, so you can have an idea who we are, what we do, and what makes us different from other NATO entities. After that, I'll move to the actual report and its findings, and finally, I will point out some conclusions. The NATO Strategic Direction South Hub, or the NSD South Hub, or simply the Hub, is a relatively young organization. It has been established in 2017 at Joint Forces Command Naples in Italy, and it reached full capability in July 2018. Its mission is to promote information sharing, which contributes to NATO comprehensive regional understanding, situational awareness, and decision-making. And as a second component of its mission, it contributes to the coordination of NATO activities in the South. To fulfill its mission, the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub connects, consults, and coordinates with military and civilian allies, partners, non-NATO organizations, and institutions, such as civilian academies, regional offices, NGOs, think tanks, etc. And I think that the Hub's participation in this webinar is a very good example of how this works in real life. Our area of interest, what we call the South, includes Middle East, North Africa, Sahel, and Sub-Saharan Africa. As I mentioned earlier, one of the Hub focuses is to engage with non-NATO entities with a particular attention on capturing the local and regional perspectives. And such engagement can have some very practical aspects. And one example is this report, which is the result of the collaborative work with the African Center for the Study and Research on Terrorism, the ACSRT. It is the third in a series of research papers whose aim is to provide a comprehensive view of trends in terrorism across the Sahel, in this case over a 2-year period, 2019 and 2020. This report follows a dual analytical approach, quantitative and qualitative. The source of primary data is the ACLED. However, this data was refined by in-depth filtering process performed by the Hub and ACSRT analysts. Before moving to the actual findings, I would like to mention that this report tracks the terrorist activity in 2 specific clusters in the Sahel, the Central Sahel, which includes Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and the Sahelian part of Lake Chad, including parts of Chad and Niger. As for the terrorist groups, the report tracks JNIM and Islamic State in the Greater Sahara in the Central Sahel cluster, and the Islamic State West Africa province and Boko Haram in Lake Chad region. Regarding the overall number of attacks, 2020 was the most intense year to date in the Sahel, with an 18.5% increase compared to 2019. A breakdown by countries shows that this increase was primarily due to activity in Mali and Niger, where the number of terrorist acts increased by more than 50%. In Niger, the situation is particularly concerning as the security deterioration occurred by the end of 2020, and we have indications that it continued also in 2021. Moreover, Niger finds itself in a quite unique and difficult situation, having to fight all the 4 terrorist groups on 2 fronts, Tillaberi and Difa, which are approximately 1,000 miles apart. Regarding Burkina Faso, there was a remarkable 15% decrease in terrorist activity in 2020. It was the first year when Burkina Faso managed to revert the growing trend that had prevailed since 2015. And we believe that several factors contributed to this, let's say, encouraging development. One is the continuous increase in military expenditure, which has likely led to some improvements in the security and defense sector. The establishment of the VDP in early 2020, which likely acted as a deterrent, at least to some extent. The concentration of counter-terrorist operations in the 3 border area, but mainly in northern Burkina Faso. And last but not the least, the deadly clashes between JNIM and ISGS, which were very intense during 2020, likely consumed part of their combat resources. No significant changes have been observed in Chad and Mauritania regarding the number of attacks. And in fact, Mauritania hasn't experienced any terrorist attacks since 2011, and that's why it's not represented on the charts. Regarding the location of the terrorist attacks, territorial expansion of all the terrorist groups was observed in the Central Sahel, while in the Lake Chad, there was no significant change between 2019 and 2020. Breaking down the situation by the terrorist group, we can observe that JNIM appeared to have shifted its focus from northern Burkina Faso to the more traditional area of operation in Mopti, Mali. And we assess that it came as a result of the previously mentioned counter-terrorist operations, but also because some developments required JNIM, and particularly Masina Liberation Front or Katiba Masina, to consolidate its position in Mali. I will point a few of these reasons. One, a series of defections from Katiba Masina towards ISGS, which triggered retaliation by the former. Potential reconciliation between JNIM and the government of Mali, which likely determined JNIM to seek for the most favorable position. And thirdly, the Katiba Masina involvement into the intercommunal conflicts in Central Mali likely led to an increase in attacks. Moving on to the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, 2020 saw this group consolidating its position in the Central Sahel by advancing on its operations in practically all directions. However, this expansion was mostly visible in two regions. First, the Tillaberi region in Niger, and here the ISGS proved quite able to recruit from the Fulani population, which became radicalized following a series of abuses by some Malian militias, such as Gatia and MSA 2 years prior, during 2018 anti-ISGS operations. In the meantime, the same militias reduced their activity against ISGS, which allowed this one for an increased freedom of operation. And the second area is Burkina Faso, where potential financial gains from artisanal gold mining has likely attracted ISGS into the region. As can be observed, JNIM was the most active terrorist groups over the course of the 2-year period. Its main area of operation was and continues to be Mali and Burkina Faso, with very limited activity in Niger. And as for the number of attacks, JNIM maintained a constant battle rhythm between 2019 and 2020. ISGS expanded its operation not only in terms of outreach, but also in frequency, making it the fastest growing group in the Sahel over the course of the 2 years. ISGS activity mostly occurred in Burkina Faso and Niger, and to a lesser extent in Mali. As for the ISWAP and Boko Haram, they continue to remain active in Niger and Chad, but their activity was less intense when compared to JNIM and ISGS. And the reason is very simple. It is because these groups are focused on northeastern Nigeria. Unfortunately, fatalities also increased by 7.7% in 2020 compared to 2019 to a total of approximately 2,050. This increase in fatalities coincides also with an increase in the number of attacks. By countries, Burkina Faso was the most affected, despite being the only one that has actually seen a reduction of fatalities in 2020. And on the opposing end, we find Mali, which was the country with the greatest increase in casualties in 2020. Civilians were the most common targets for all terrorist groups, and from this point of view, 2020 was a really catastrophic year, with the number of attacks against civilians increasing by 39% and fatalities by 21%. And we believe there are at least 2 reasons for civilians being targeted on such a large scale. First of all, they represent soft targets, at least when compared to security forces. And the increased involvement of terrorist groups in intercommunal violence, especially the JNIM, has likely led to the higher number of attacks and casualties. Local security forces, abbreviated as ASF, remain the second most targeted category, but 2020 also brings some improvements, with the number of soldiers fatalities decreasing by more than 1/3. By group, JNIM continues to cause the greatest number of fatalities, followed closely by ISGS. But JNIM at the same time is the least lethal group because its attacks are more focused on hard targets such as security forces, approximately 2/3 of the total in 2010-20. And in this project, we define lethality as the ratio between the number of fatalities and number of attacks. Okay, as can be observed, the small arms and light weapons are by far the most used TTP for the terrorist groups, and there are some reasons for this. First, they only require minimal skills, which is probably the case due to hasty recruitment by terrorist groups. Secondly, there is a high availability of arms across the Sahel, and thirdly, the soft nature of most targets, especially civilians, simply does not require more advanced weaponry. Improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, are the second most used TTP, mainly employed by JNIM. And the 197 IED attacks performed by JNIM, as opposed to only 30 by ISGS or 24 by ISWAP, shows that it has a superior expertise. However, with under 2 fatalities actually per attack, the efficiency of the IED is extremely low across the whole field, and this is an indicator that the terrorist groups in the Sahel are far less advanced than their counterparts elsewhere in the world, like Middle East, Horn of Africa, and elsewhere. The complex attacks, although they are rare, they are the most lethal. For instance, in just 1 month between December 19 and January 20, 160 Nigerian soldiers have been killed in 2 complex attacks in Inates and Chenagodrara. Some key conclusions. The degradation of the security in the Sahel continued in 2020. We've seen negative developments in Mali and Niger, but a slight improvement in Burkina Faso. JNIM remains the dominant terrorist group, but the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara has increased its activity and geographical outreach. We have witnessed a considerable increase in attacks against civilians and civilian casualties, and the terrorist groups continue to employ a largely unskilled fighting force, as demonstrated by the use of very elementary TTPs. Hold on. This concludes my briefing. Thank you very much for your attention. Can follow and connect with us on Twitter and LinkedIn, and can find us at our website where you can download these products and some other interesting products. Thank you very much. That was all from my side, and pending your questions, of course.
Does anyone have any questions for Major Aanei? It was a very, very factual and insightful information presentation. Thank you very much. We always appreciate the NATO Southern Hub, your hospitality and presenting with us. Is there any questions? Let me check the chat.
I think I would like to ask Cristian a
there
question.
You go.
Cristian, this is Dr. Olawunmi. I'm going to present shortly, but I'd like to ask, what's your view? Do you think fighting terrorism in the Sahel is being helped by the kinetic approach rather than diplomacy? This is because I have been in this business of fighting terrorism for quite a while, and I've been around Africa, and I observed that the kinetic effort, military solution has not helped over the years. I believe that most of the weapons that are being used in Africa are not manufactured therein. And I feel differently from our research at the Institute that we should focus more on the sponsors of this terrorism instead of trying to fight the foot soldiers. What is your view?
Well, thank you very much for your comment and your question, and I think you are perfectly right. The terrorism is a problem, especially in places like Sahel, but it is not the only problem. We, at least at the hub, we look more at what we call instability, where insecurity is part of it, where terrorism is part of the insecurity. And the solution for reducing instability definitely is not a purely kinetical one. If we move back, let's say 1 decade ago, before everything started in Mali and then in the Sahel, we can see that those terrorist groups that didn't appear out of nowhere. First of all, those countries had a lot of structural vulnerabilities that basically created a breeding ground for the terrorist groups to appear and to proliferate. So I think the solution is, while still fighting the terrorist groups, also to address the structural vulnerabilities of the states, which can be found everywhere in the politics, economy, society, social development, and so on and so forth. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, I think you've been able to mention other causatives, of terrorism in Sahel. From the research we've conducted at the Institute, we observed that most of the areas that are troubled, where you have turmoil, we observe that these are the areas that there are a lot of mineral resources and where people use as drug routes. And we are almost concluding at the Institute that terrorism is just a crude form of mercantilism, whereby multinationals sponsor unemployed youths to cause troubles and insecurity with a view to actually having unfettered access to the resources in Niger, in Mali, and also using that area as drug routes. We feel that if we go after the sponsors of these fighters, NATO will spend less money in fighting the scourge. I think this is another addition I'd like to ask and to add, because at the Institute, we have been conducting researches and we feel that sending troops and arms to fight the foot soldiers has not helped over the past 30 years.
Right. An increase in troops usually mean an increase in targets. Targets of opportunity, and I know terrorists, they feed on targets of opportunity really good, especially with an influx of small arms, light weapons that are coming into the country daily across border. So thank you, Dr. Olawunmi, for your question. Is there any other questions for Major Aanei?
Yeah, sorry, Todd.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Amos from Tanzania.
Amos, yes, from Tanzania, welcome.
Yeah, sorry, I'm very concerned and I'm happy to hear from Mr. Majan, but fighting terrorists, it seems there is behind of something, because they use a modern tools to fight, and being the country being fighting the terrorists, I thought to me that this is will not be solution. So I want to hear his view that what's supposed to do and who is supporting terrorists, because now I can give you an example. We are looking Mozambique.
Right.
Mozambique now is an issue. If you see the victim is the civilian. They have no technique on how to overcome this situation. So when the terrorists are fighting with the soldiers from combination of regions, so whether the leader of this region need to do to overcome this?
So if I understood you, what should the leadership in Tanzania be doing to overcome the terrorism issue? That question directed for Major. Was that the correct question, Major? Did you understand that? What does leadership have to do?
Yep, that was my understanding too. I cannot speak in behalf of the leadership, NATO leadership or other organization leadership, but during the comment there was another question: who's supporting the terrorism or the terrorists? In the Sahel, interesting enough, they are kind of able to support themselves.
Right.
They are affiliated to the global networks like Al Qaeda and Daesh, but there is little practical cooperation. Part of the global network, but more in theory than in practice. Yeah, they are able to support by colluding with organized crime, by taking control of natural resources, kidnapping for ransom, and so on and so forth. What we're trying to do at the hub is to capture the local perspective, regional perspective, offer leadership the best understanding that we can have, and they will make the proper decisions.
Hopefully that answered your question, Amos.
Clear, understand.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So at this time, I'd like again to thank Major Aanei for his presentation. We're going to move on with the panel discussion. And thank you again, sir. We appreciate your time. I think at the end of the panel discussion, there'll be an opportunity maybe for a few more questions with some of the topics that we have. And I know that you're basically presenting on the facts in that report. So I understand and I appreciate your candor with being able to answer some questions. I understand how it is that sometimes we just do what we're told to present, and that's good. We appreciate your time. So thank you again. And next up is Dr. Kunle Olawunmi. And with that, the goal of the panel discussion today was to provide learners with a comprehensive view of the global fight against terrorism. So this block of instruction on this is how to select international organizations, how select international organizations work towards a common counterterrorism goal. So description in the fight against terrorism, the responsibility to monitor, engage, deter, or punish lies predominantly lie with the sovereign states and international and regional organizations such as the United Nations, the EU, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, NATO, and the Global Counterterrorism Forum, as well as institutions like the Global Counterterrorism Institute, which provide a discourseful platform to engage in research studies, to provide information for students in the education in countering terrorism and violent extremism. Such organizations are committed to fostering international peace and security and promoting social progress, equality, and human rights. In leadership and assistance capabilities, they form a global counterterrorism network. And networking is the key in collaboration to any successful operation. They also help open diplomatic pathways for the sharing of intelligence and the formation of regional and international counterterrorism strategies. So the learning objectives today were, and I understand Irfan Yar also wants to speak if he can, and I think we're going to have time to get both you and Dr. Olawunmi in, and then we'll close out with Royce and Melo, who's probably got a good discussion with this on Mozambique and a few other areas in Africa. So the learning objectives today's panel discussion were to differentiate between national and international regional approaches. Study, study, study. Research, research, research. That's the key to understanding what's going on. And that is different methods of understanding, whether it's ideology, whether it's culture, or ethnic divisions. And these approaches are of important to cooperations. So with that, we were also going to discuss the overarching strategies in the fight against terrorism, and also assess the respective specialties of key international organizations. And so with the first issue for consideration of the panel, Dr. Kunle Olawunmi is a retired Navy Commodore. Dr. Olawunmi is the Department Head of Criminology and Security Studies at Cristian University in Nigeria, and a Professor of Intelligence and Global Security Studies who retired a Navy Commodore in 2017. And that, for some of you land people, is a one-star general. He was a one-time defense advisor to France and 2014 member of the Harvard Senior Executive Course, National and International Security Studies. Kunle holds a PhD in International Relations and Diplomacy from CEDS in France, and a Master of Science degree in Strategic Studies from the University of Ibadan, and a Bachelor of Economics from the University of Nigeria. He is an alumnus of the Galilee International Management Institute in Israel, United States Naval War College, and the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He has published many articles, and he has a current book on Nigeria, Global Peace and International Protection on Human Rights. It was published in Germany and translated into 8 other languages in 2008. Kunle was instrumental in bringing Niger Delta militancy to a powerful resolution with Boko Haram. Dr. Olawunmi is also a current International Senior Programs Director at our institute. And so greetings, Mr. Dr. Olawunmi, how are you? Olawunmi?
Todd, I'm very flattered. Thank you very much. I'm very good. I'm very good.
So the panel discussion, one of the questions that we came up with for you first was, what roles do international and regional organizations play in facilitating the building of military and national security capabilities within the Sahel region, following that wonderful report by Major Aanei? Can you comment for our listeners today?
Yeah, thank you very much, Todd. This is a very important topic, and I think it's very momentous at this time. We in Nigeria, for example, have been involved in a lot of this effort. Remember, Nigeria was in Liberia in the 90s, and we're in Sierra Leone, and we managed to bring peace and democratic institutions back to those countries. We have been involved in Mali, Niger, and a lot of countries in Nigeria. If you look at Africa, we have institutions that are actually designed to actually mitigate some of these insecurity, like the African Union, for example. They have institutions, they have departments that actually they're focused on this. That's why you have the African Union Standby Force in Somalia, for example. And you also have them littered all over Ethiopia, Kenya, and some other troubled region. In the West African sub-region also, we have the ECOMOG that did so well in enforcing peace in those countries that I mentioned earlier. That's Liberia, Sierra Leone. We were briefly in Cote d'Ivoire and even in Guinea. But what we discovered is that these efforts have been actually frustrated by some of the P5 members. And I really want to tell our auditors, those people that are auditing this program, to take this back to their states. What we discover in Sahel, for example, is intrusion by external forces, from Russia, from China, from France, and from the United States and many other countries. And we actually visited Mali, the northern part, the Azawad region, when I was in the National Defense College. And we observed that most of the troubled areas in the northern aspect, the Zagreb, as we mentioned, are endowed with a lot of mineral resources. And some of the areas in West Africa that does not have these resources are mainly at peace. If you mention Togo, Benin Republic, even some part of Guinea, you see that they are majorly at peace and there are less terrorist activities in those areas. But wherever you have diamonds, wherever you have uranium and so on, we observe that those are the areas that actually bedeviled with some of these terrorist activities. And I just want to use this opportunity to actually tell the P5 members to look at these areas where states are sponsoring fighters to protect the mercantilist activities and drug-related activities that are going on in this area. And also caution manufacturers of AK-47 and RPGs that are not manufactured in these areas to actually try to monitor and look at their end user certificates so that some of these weapons do not find themselves in Africa. Todd, do you want me to go on with my presentation, or do you have any other questions for me? Okay, I think I will use this opportunity to continue with my presentation. We are looking at the counterterrorism strategy in the Sahel region predominantly. Also, we are looking at what is happening in Kenya, the Al-Shabaab, and we're looking at what is happening also in the Horn of Africa, where because of the geostrategic location of Somalia, the area has actually become an area where people are competing for space. If you look at I don't know whether my screen is being shared right now. If it is, you look at the objective really of
Dr. Kunle, your screen is frozen. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who see it or other speakers.
Yeah, it's off the side a little bit. It's you have to open the screen full. If you can change the view, I believe you'll be able to get that.
Is it better now?
No.
I think this is the best my screen can show, but can you see the main slide?
Go ahead and stop sharing your screen. I will go ahead and open up your slides for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. And that's the Sahel set, correct?
This is the second one. That's the NSOs in counter-terrorism strategy. Thank you very much. I think it's also skewed. Let me see.
Okay, the first slide is there, sir.
Is everybody seeing the correct slide now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is the second one, Todd. This is the second one I'm going to present. I'm presenting the national security organizations in the.
Okay, just a second. I'll open that one up.
This is perfect. We are looking at the national security organizations in counter-terrorism strategy. Second slide, please. Yeah, if you look at the four strands of counter-terrorism strategy, the first one is for us to prepare. The second one is for us to investigate. And the third one is for us to pursue the militants and disrupt the terrorist attack. If you look at the first one, prepare, most countries in Africa that I know, be it Nigeria, Algeria, South Africa, even Kenya, and so on, they know that this problem exists. And they have made a lot of effort to train special forces to contain some of this squad. And the investigation that is carried out at African Union, ECOWAS Union, has shown that kinetic energy or kinetic force has not been helpful. In pursuing them, we also found out that we have to contend with the big powers that have interest in this region. I remember I was sent once to the forward edge of battle area in Liberia. And we are confronted with, for example, the Ukrainians, who brought arms and weapons, and logistics for Charles Taylor. And all our efforts to stop that transit was met with threats from Ukraine. I also remember that the Nigerian contingents were not allowed to operate fully in Mali because the French government feels that they are actually qualified to protect Mali. And if you look at the problem in northern Mali, it's been persistent, it's been perennial, and it has not gone away. Our statistics shows that despite all these counter-terrorism efforts by the United States, the French, to some extent, even the Russians, have not yielded any results. In pursuing this so-called terrorists, we discovered that some of them are being protected and being supplied by those mercantilists, I like to call them, that feels that they have right to those resources in these places. So our effort to disrupt the terrorist attack has been largely hindered by the powerful countries that have interests in those areas. So the first strands have not been able to achieve the necessary mitigation because of what I just mentioned, the interest groups that are in those areas that are taking the resources. Some of the drugs that moved from South America also passed through Mali. And to disrupt those programs, we found out that it's very difficult, to do. These drugs find their way one way or the other to Europe. And the ECOWAS Union were unable to actually do much in disrupting the terrorist activities there. Next slide, please. Here, we try to look at agencies that are, all over the world, and especially in Nigeria, that have been investigating. You have the NSA, the DIA, the DSS, the Department of State Services. And what we also observe is that they are limited in getting necessary diplomatic encouragement because some of the states in West Africa and some other parts of Africa takes instructions from France, from the United Kingdom, and from other big powers. Even China's are becoming big players in this area. And we observe that their presence in this area have not really helped in mitigating terrorist activities in these areas. We want to use this opportunity from the Institute to appeal to some of these states to also reduce the amount of arms manufactured in their various countries that are finding their way into the Zagreb region and in Nigeria in particular. I'm coming to the Institute with about 35 years of combat intelligence operations. And all the time, sometimes we have to take permission from some of the big powers for us to go in to make arrests. And sometimes we found out that the sophistication of some of these terrorists are due to the arms that are all over Africa. We have more than 6 million small arms in West Africa alone. None of these arms are manufactured in the region. The question we try to ask is, how did these arms leave the factories in the first instance with their pattern numbers, with the required end user certificates, and find their ways into hands of ISWAP, for example? How did they get to ISWAP? And when we look at the pattern number, we see that some of these arms are manufactured in Russia. Some of them are Chinese made. Some of them are made in the United States. We are worried that some of these arms are getting out into the wrong hands. And as long as these arms are getting themselves into the wrong hands, I think we will continue to do what I consider Tom and Jerry game. We keep on pursuing them. They keep on getting more arms. And sometimes they're even more armed than our troops. So I think if we can reduce the amount of arms that find that their way into Africa, I believe that we could have gone a long way in fighting terrorism. Next slide, please. Now, we are looking at effective counter-terrorism strategy. And what we do at the Institute is to conduct a lot of research and analysis, do conferences and policy support as we are doing today. And we also conduct strategic studies for users. And we think that some of the auditors of this program will take some of the lessons learned here. And one of the major lessons is what I consider the Jordan's continuum. If you look at terrorism, it's just a tool in the hands of multinationals. Because if you go to DRC Congo, you see a lot of fighters, militants. But what we observe is that mining of mineral resources never stopped. Even though the civilians, those people from those countries cannot access those regions, foreigners from China, from Belgium, from France, have free access. They move freely and take the mineral resources away. You see flights coming in, going out, and we say we are fighting terrorism. But the mineral resources kept on leaving the African shores. So there is something we are not doing. And that is why the Institute have decided to come up with this research to tell the NATO that the amount of money being spent on fighting this scourge are not necessary. You don't need to spend trillions of dollars in Afghanistan. You don't need to spend billions of dollars in Syria. You don't need to spend so much money in Africa to contain this scourge if you can use diplomacy to tell the arms manufacturer to punish them if they err. And if you find diamond, gold on the street of Antwerp or Brussels, you should query it because some of these diamonds are tainted with blood. So this is the lesson, this is the message we want to pass across to all intelligence agencies, to all states that are budgeting hard-earned taxpayers' money to fight terrorism. If you can stop terrorism financing, we believe at the Institute that you could have gone a long way in actually reducing the amount of money and your men that you put in harm's way all the time. If you just could mitigate those financiers, those aeroplanes that are flying in and out of Africa, taking mineral resources, you could have saved the lives of American troops in Mali. You could have saved the life of British troops in Afghanistan. You could have saved a lot of lives, and you could have used your taxpayers' money judiciously if you actually go after the financiers. Permit me to mention that while I was the Deputy Defense I was in Defense Headquarters in Nigeria, I actually promoted this same policy in 2016. That for us to effectively counter Boko Haram, we shouldn't go after the fighters. We shouldn't go after the leadership of Boko Haram. The Americans, they made the same mistake. They went after Osama bin Laden. The question is, after the death of Osama bin Laden, has terrorism stopped? After killing so much ISWAP and Talibans, has terrorism stopped? So at the Institute, we are saying that if you are doing the same thing over and over again, if you are doing the same thing over 3 decades, 4 decades, and the problem is not going away, then you have to think anew. You have to think differently. You have to look at something else. And this is using diplomacy to stop countries like Iran, to stop countries like Russia and China from proliferating Africa, Asia with arms. Because if you remove 2 things, there are 2 variables that we did in our research. If you remove arms from the equation, there'll be no terrorism. The other joke we make in Africa is that if you remove mineral resources from DRC, mineral resources from Mali, there'll be no terrorism there. So why do we engage, why do they engage in terrorism in the first instance, which is the next slide? You discover that because there's so much poverty, inequality, globalization, technology, and the need for energy, this is the main reason why terrorism or terrorist activities subsist in sub-Saharan Africa. The ones you experience in the United States and some of these other big countries, we call them pathological terrorists. These people, they lack political connection. And you see that what you need to pursue are those people that are financing the terrorist activities. Can we go to the next slide? The next program, please, Todd. Todd, are you there?
Dr. Olawunmi, can we move to the next question real quick?
About Sahel, please. Can you move to the Sahel? The next question about Sahel.
Yes. Can we actually get Irfan Yar to speak? He has to go to another event in about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back to you in about 10 minutes. Just finish the second set. Okay. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Irfan Yar and have him brief on his question topic. Mr. Irfan Yar is a research fellow. He's also the current founder and senior director of the Afghanistan Security Institute, and he is a member of our current advisory board at the Global CT Institute. He is a double master, a master of international relations and area studies from New Delhi, and a Master of Arts in International Affairs at the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs in Ottawa. He completed his Bachelor Honor in Political Science. His areas of research focuses on the Taliban insurgency, terrorism, and Islamist extremism in Afghanistan and South Asia. He has published many national and international outlets, including the Hill Times, the National Post, the Toronto Sun, the Mint, the Epoch Times, the Diplomat magazines, and elsewhere. He has previously worked with the MacDonald Laurier Institute and the Observer Research Foundation at Carnegie, India. He speaks Pashto, Persian, Dari, Urdu, Hindi, and intermediate level German and Arabic. And so at this time, I turn it over to Mr. Irfan Yar. And Mr. Yar, part of the presentation you have was geared toward how did the exit of the Afghanistan war, how did that affect what they're now calling the Taliban effect? And that was recently in an article that was written because the recent ouster of an elective government by the Taliban in Afghanistan had African governments and media fretting about Islamic terrorism. So would you care to answer that? We know Africa and Afghanistan are two different distinct areas, and how that would affect with the recent ouster of the government in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Todd, and I apologize for interrupting Professor Kunle's presentation. It was great, but unfortunately I had to go, so I shamelessly jumped in. Apologize. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these days, if we see the events and the shifts taking place both in Africa and Afghanistan, of course, these two are two distinct geographies in terms of culture, religion, history, political system, and many other aspects. But, when we talk about, I would rather focus more on counter-terrorism strategies and the challenges that the previous government was facing in Afghanistan. And some of them may be related to Africa as well. Right now, the situation in Afghanistan is in crisis. We don't see any counter-terrorism strategies because this is so complex. The people who we used to call them terrorists, they are in power now. And we will see that what their counter-terrorism strategies are. So the first and foremost, a challenge that the previous Afghan government I'm talking about from 2002 to 2020, that was facing was that there was no single terrorist group in Afghanistan. And if they had to deal with one terrorist group through diplomatic channels, the other terrorist group, would be emerging. For example, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, ISK, which is the Islamic State in Khorasan, an Islamic State branch for Indian subcontinent and Afghanistan and the neighboring region, and Al-Qaeda. So first, it was very difficult, to deal with so many terrorist groups in Afghanistan. Another challenge that we witnessed was the foreign support to terrorism. On the ground, maybe you could, because of the Iron Fist policy, you could curb terrorism, you could, curtail their finance and other support, but most of the terrorist groups were also getting, massive support from many countries. So it was very difficult, for the Afghan government and its allies, including the US and its Western friends, to curb terrorism in Afghanistan, because they had, control over the territory of Afghanistan, but they could not, in general, go to the neighboring countries, to destroy safe havens there, even though there were some cases, but they were very, limited. And the third one, the key challenge that really failed the counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan was the weak Afghan government. The Afghan government, was totally dependent on foreign aid. They had very less budget for counter-terrorism strategies. And even their military forces were not very professional comparative to other countries. So they were in some ways, way more less professional than many segments of the Taliban or some other insurgent groups. And of course, another challenge that the counter-terrorism strategy failed was unstable socio-economic structure, because most of the counter-terrorism policies, especially from 2001 to 2010, was focused on military solutions. So they would, they were trying to bring stability in Afghanistan with gunpoint, but they drastically failed. They had, less investment in social and other developmental sectors, because when people are unemployed, when people are, socially frustrated, so they tend to join such extremist group. And the lake was, so that loophole also, brought a lot of extremism back on the track. And of course, in rural Afghanistan, the Taliban or other, insurgent or extremist groups, they were very closely engaged with the people in rural Afghanistan. But the Afghan government and its allies, they were unable to, forge good relationship with people and the local level. So the Taliban, implemented policies, so that they can win the hearts and mind of Afghan people. And they would, portray a very negative image of the counter-insurgency operation. For example, if there were drone attacks on a village, many, innocent people, maybe by mistake, and would be killed. And then the Taliban would say, look, we would tell you that Americans and their allies are your enemy. They are killing innocent friends. So, the communication between the local people and the Afghan government and its allies were cut by the Taliban. So the Taliban diverted, their attention to local people, and they were the one who actually were communicating with the people on the rural ground. So those were, some of the key challenges that the Afghan government faced. And that was, I think, one of the key reasons that the Afghan government and the US was getting weaker and weaker in dealing with the Taliban. And lately we have witnessed that the Taliban, after 20 years of, fight, came to power in Afghanistan. And now once again, they are the rural of Afghanistan, which was once considered as global terrorists. So this was all I had to say in this short time. Thank you, Todd. Is there any question I can answer briefly?
Thank you.
Yes,
Irfan.
Irfan. Is it okay if I ask some question? Yeah,
Yes,
Todd?
go ahead.
Yeah, good morning to all of you. Gerard calling from Singapore. A few questions that I have for Mr. Irfan. Yeah, question number one. Do you see the potential of the resurgence of Al-Qaeda's affiliation and cooperation with the Taliban to resurrect their chemical weapons program, which existed in the 80s, in the late 80s? That's question number one. Question number two, what role do you see the Pakistani intelligence, ISI, has, how much leverage do they have over the Taliban? Because it has been reported they have been in cahoot with each other for quite some time. My last question is on strategies dealing with the Taliban. Do you think what China is doing now with the Taliban, engaging the Taliban in a very cordial manner in investment and providing the funds, do you think that's a good strategy as far as the Chinese tactics are concerned? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. All questions need, a lot of time and discussion, but I would try as much as possible to briefly answer. So first is the cooperation between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, whether is it possible in future. I don't think so the Taliban will cooperate with Al-Qaeda because they have committed, that they will cut ties with a terrorist group, including Al-Qaeda. However, it is uncertain to say that the Al-Qaeda will not make safe havens in Afghanistan. Maybe because if the Taliban government is weak, even without the Taliban permission, they will be able, to sneak into Afghanistan and operate its own, operation in the country. Because when the government is weak, when a system is weak, so anybody can misuse that place. And this was the case even when the Afghan government was in power, because Afghan government could not extend its authority to all the territory of Afghanistan. There were many places where the government was not present, and now the Taliban are way more weaker than the Afghan government. So until they become a very strong government and exert its influence to all the territory of the country, then it is very less likely that the Al-Qaeda will not secure a place in Afghanistan. And second, in terms of ISI, historically, and there are a lot of documentation that ISI had very close relationship with the Taliban, and they have also confessed that they were closely involved, also both in insurgency period and the post-insurgent period as well. But the question remains, unanswered, whether what kind of engagement do they have with the Taliban, how they want to use the Taliban vis-a-vis India, for example, or do they want to extend its influence in Afghanistan more? So these are the questions that are yet to be emerging. But historically speaking, they do have very close cooperation and friendly relation with ISI. And in terms of China-Taliban relationship, lately for the last 3-4 years, China is trying its best, to increase its diplomatic relationship with the world. And China also see the Taliban as potential allies, especially when it comes to, exploring Afghanistan untapped mineral, because Afghanistan, asset, I think, more than 2 trillion worth of minerals. So it's a great opportunity for China to explore, those virgin minerals. And at the same time, China want to have good relationship with the Taliban because, it will help China to contain the export of extremism to its western, province, Xinjiang, where, the Uyghur Muslim are some of the separatists, are involved in some activities. So this is like both way working, but I think China will, take longer time in order to assure the security situation, and then it can, go for a higher investment.
Yeah, thank you for a very insightful answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. So unfortunately, I will have to leave for the other event. And if you had time after this event, you are welcome to join that one. It will be on the US, why did the US failed in Afghanistan. I will share the link in the chat as well.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Irfan Yar. I understand there are some more questions, and hopefully we'll have some answers for you.
And I'm also happy to interact with all those who want, through LinkedIn or email. So I'm really sorry that I cannot answer now.
No, we understand how valuable time is, especially in the Afghanistan effect right now. So thank you again, Mr. Irfan Yar from the Afghan Security Institute. And we'll go back to our panelist, Dr. Kunle Olawunmi, who's going to start, I believe, his second set on his question of what roles do international and regional organizations play in facilitating the building of military and national security capabilities. Again, thank you, Mr. Irfan Yar, and we'll turn it back over to Dr. Olawunmi.
Thank you too.
Thank you very much, Irfan, for that wonderful presentation. And thank you, Todd, for giving me this opportunity to talk about Sahel. Before I start, I would like to tell our audience that Nigeria has been very worried about Sahel for different reasons. One of the reasons is because of the movement of some of these fighters to Nigeria, through Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad. We made efforts severally to visit the northern Mali, and we observed that, as I said earlier, our efforts cannot yield much ground. We use ECOWAS platform also to try to intervene with the leadership in Mali. We found strongly that the French government have a very vice-like hold on that government until the military junta, came in, just as we have in Guinea. I think the first presenter, Cristian, has done justice to the geography of the Sahel. And these are the countries that are made up of this region. But they have actually become the pressure that has actually acted on some of the countries that are south of the Sahara. And the advent of Boko Haram in Nigeria and the people I refer to as the Janjaweeds, that's the desert thieves that are actually moving en masse from the Sahel region, has become a major problem to us in Nigeria, in Chad, in Niger, and to a large extent in the areas of Burkina Faso. I think let's move to the next slide, Todd. Yeah, these are the countries that I'd like to focus on. If you look at Mauritania, why there's some level of quietness there is because the big powers are very concerned on what is happening in the Western Sahara. If you look at the Western Sahara, where there's a lot of problems, it hardly made news, but the pressure being put on the fighters in this region have actually pushed some of these fighters downwards, and you can see Ghana is fighting tooth and nail to ensure that terrorism does not have a foothold in Ghana. And it's just a matter of time if the big powers begin, as we are seeing, to pay attention to China, the South China Sea, Taiwan, and some of the countries that are having problems with China. We are afraid that with the many fighters that we have there that are being pushed from Libya, from Syria, from Afghanistan, even from the Horn of Africa, we are afraid that the challenges we have south of the Sahara is going to increase. If the forces in Northern Africa move and start paying attention to China, I think we're going to have a lot of problem on our hands. So I think we should look at the problem and see that it's going to be a serious matter in the next 5 years or 10 years down the line when the P5 moves to the Far East. Next slide, please. In the next slide, I actually mentioned that Sahel is underrated. Underrated in the sense that the global impact of what is going to happen in the northern part of Africa and south of Sahara will impact negatively on the economic life of some of the advanced countries. Because if that place is left unattended to, my belief is that most of the mineral resources that are being found in this area, human resources that have been exported to the north, to the west, are going to be hindered. We know that China is very important right now, but I think it's high time that the West pay more attention to what is happening there. They are leaving the multinationals to actually thrive in this region. We believe that some of the armor tanks you're seeing, some of the weapons you're seeing are being sold by some of these merchants. And they're making a lot of money now, but I think with time, it's going to disrupt effort there. It's going to be free for all. Next slide, please. Yeah, I also mentioned in this slide that I think the world is looking away from the area and is becoming a breeding ground for the jihadists. There's nothing that is ideological about what is happening in the Sahel. And I want to stress this, especially for our auditors from NATO and some of you that are also auditing from some of the Western countries. There's nothing ideological in the Zagreb region, and there's really nothing religious about it. The statistic that has been shown by Cristian earlier, if they want to break it down, you see that more Muslims are being killed. If it is religious war, why are more Muslims being killed? I mean, these are the questions we have been asking at the Institute. If you want to propagate Islam, then you are destroying more mosques. You are killing more Muslims than even Christians. So it is not a religious war. There's nothing ideological about it. It is economic, and that's what we should begin to look at. There's a lot of concern about human rights, about issue of droughts, loss of hope, and so on. And I think people should begin to pay attention to multinationals that are actually arming some of these fighters with a view to taking drugs and resources across the northern part of Africa to Europe. Next slide, please. This next slide is going to talk about the role of international organizations. If you look at what is happening in the Sahel region, you will discover that it's not that we lack international organizations' effort there. There's virtually no international organization that is not in the Sahel region. The question is, why are they not efficient? Why are they not effective? Why is the situation in the Sahel getting out of hand? So I think if we look at the next slide, because of time, I actually talk about the deep state. Why does it take so long? How many people have to die? If you look at what happened after the Second World War, the Marshall Plan that actually brought back Japan, South Korea, and some other countries from the grip of the Soviet Union then, it did not take this long. The challenge in the Sahel has gone on for more than 3 decades. And instead of the problem going down with all the countries that are present there, the problem has been escalating. And we believe that the French government have to have a rethink. If you take resources from a place and you turn it to a fighting zone, then I think it's just a matter of time that some of the refugees that have been displaced are going to litter themselves all over Europe. How many people have been crossing the Mediterranean Sea to run away from this scourge? And if the multinationals that are taking diamonds and other resources to Brussels, to Antwerp, and so on, if they are not cautioned, if all the arms merchants that are making so much money using arms for resources, again, if they are not cautioned, I think we're going to have a spillover effect in Europe because the Institute believes that using armed forces, using all the NGOs in that region has not helped. What could help is to reduce the amount of weapons that are going to Sahel and caution all the merchants that are selling arms and taking resources away from this region to enrich us. So I would like to stop here in case if there's going to be any question, because I know time is not our friend today. So Todd, thank you very much. I really thank you for the time.
Dr. Olawunmi, thank you very much for your time. We actually have about 22 minutes left before we need to close. And so that brings us to one last participant. And if there are questions for Dr. Olawunmi, you can absolutely email him. He'll put his email address in there, or if you'd like to continue on in the next segment, that next segment is on anti-bribery and corruption. We also know in the Institute that corruption is a big factor in what continues with belief systems in certain countries. And so without removing the bribery and the corruption, the poverty in these areas, there's likely to be no change in the status of terrorism. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over and thank Dr. Olawunmi again for his presentations and remarks. And at this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Royce de Melo. Royce de Melo is a Canadian Middle East expert and Africa security consultant, analyst, and defense consultant who has a portfolio of companies he represents internationally. He has comprehensive experience in dealing and working with the private sector and governments in a variety of capacities. He's worked in close protection training, a liaison officer, interpreter, and security consulting and management, risk assessments, procurement, and as a researcher and historical analyst, particularly covering security, terrorism, and regional issues. We've had Royce on in the past. He is our resident historian. Thank you. He has worked and lived in the Middle East for more than 20 years. His work over the years has provided him with useful hands-on, sometime school of hard knocks, as he says, experience and valuable insights into matters relating to terrorism, conflict, regional politics, security, and the defense interests. So at this time, Mr. Royce de Melo, thank you for joining us. We have a question for you in our panel discussion of how do international and regional organizations empower traditional capacities for peace and security. And I know that's one of your specialties. So if you can enlighten us a little bit with your presentation, thank you very much, sir.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to enlighten you, but I will certainly try. Oh, by the way, before I go on, regarding arms, this is something I deal with. So if there's any questions regarding the supply of arms to the terrorist networks in the Sahel, and I'm sure the major in Naples will maybe go along with me on this, I can say that one of the big problems, it's worth noting, is that the Libyan revolution caused a massive spill of arms throughout the Sahel, where arms even went into the Gaza Strip, as far as there. And I had intelligence back when this was happening of arms going through Egypt even. But anyway, so if anyone wants to ask questions about that later on, please feel free. Now, regarding the question, my answer is, first, I think we need to face the reality of the sovereignty of nations in Africa. It all comes down to each individual country and its leadership. Each country decides how much they will allow for international and or regional organizations to help and empower any peace building initiatives and counterterrorism and or military endeavors within their own borders. And it's the individual nation that decides if or how it will assist and or work with other countries. So yes, in the fight against terrorism, the responsibility to monitor, engage, deter, or punish lies predominantly with the sovereign states. Meanwhile, I reckon that most countries would prefer that a sovereign nation facing a terrorism threat would be capable of handling its own troubles rather than get involved if they can help it. Also, it's to be expected that countries would probably prefer to confront any problem inside their own borders alone and on their own terms, including terrorism and a terrorist insurrection. That being said, sometimes this can actually make the problem worse, so that when things get really bad, that's when the call for outside help comes in. A good example of this is Mozambique. I firmly believe that the Islamist insurrection that rose up in the northern province of Cabo Delgado on the border of Tanzania could have been crushed very early on, probably back in 2017. Mozambique's military and police struggled to stop and contain the terrorists as they wreaked havoc and gained ground, attacking police stations and military bases while also striking out to the islands at the sea. Until last month, ISIS Mozambique, IM, controlled several districts in Cabo Delgado, but now they're on the run. And that's because Rwandan troops came to the rescue and joined the fight, albeit late in the day. And only when, out of the blue, Rwanda sent its contingent of frontline troops did we finally see any action in the South African development community, the SADC, after long-time promises to help Mozambique by committing troops and other assistance. Rwanda is not a SADC member. Prior to the Rwanda deployment, there was lots of dilly-dallying with SADC. There was procrastination and meetings after meeting to talk, and then some more talk, and then there was extraordinary meetings to talk, and then more talk. Rwanda's deployment of frontline troops, who wasted no time to go on the offensive in Cabo Delgado when they arrived, likely shamed the SADC into action. However, we also have to wonder if Mozambique President Nyusi might have been a factor in SADC's delays. Even so, much of the SADC help seems to be token help, the help that's coming now, with some sending advisors, some sending a handful of troops. This goes to my point about the sovereignty of countries and each country making its own decision on such matters. The SADC, like any international or regional organization or alliance, is only as effective as its members want it to be. And this applies to the rest of the continent in West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, or the Sahel or North Africa, the African Union, the G5. So while international and regional organizations can, of course, empower traditional capacities for peace and security, it's not always a given that it will work smoothly or that it will work at all in the short or long terms. Culture, politics, nationalism, national interest, economics, tribalism, corruption, differing perspectives can be factors in hampering effectiveness or getting positive results or to accepting any help at all. As I often say, and to put a spin on a well-known quote by the famous management consultant Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. In the context that Peter Drucker used the phrase, it had to do with the culture of a company, determining success regardless of how effective your strategy may be. But the phrase can easily be spun to refer to societies, cultures, nations, ethnic groups, and socio-political aspects, politics, international relations, war, and terrorism. Perhaps Afghanistan is an example of culture eats strategy for breakfast. Needless to say, to all of you, the fact is, whatever the dimensions required that help build peace and security and to fight terrorism, some African nations will need help and will allow for it, and often this is done on their own terms. Many countries just do not have the resources, skills, experience to take on terrorism and matters that often drive insurgencies and conflict, and social, political, and economic issues, illicit trade, cybercrime, human rights issues, refugee problems, humanitarian crisis, peace building. Most countries expect the help they receive from organizations in or other countries to complement their existing security, defense, government, and social apparatuses, or at least to appear to be complementing and not overtaking or outperforming existing apparatuses. National pride can be a touchy thing, and cultural sensitivity is important for the smooth provision of any help and tasks on the ground. At a basic level, for example, generally the UN can't go into a country unless that government allows for it. For a country to allow a foreign military and or police force into that country, they will implement stipulations and rules, and sometimes these rules can hamper good policies and operations in the short and long term. France's military intervention in the Sahel Operation Barkhane comes with stipulations from local governments. And going back to my point about countries making their own decisions, France is now reducing its forces in Operation Barkhane. It'll be more up to the local governments and their alliances to carry on the fight and bring peace and security. Nonetheless, African countries' military, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies are empowered greatly by the material and advisory assistance provided by international and regional organizations and foreign governments. Some countries manage quite well on their own. Egypt comes to mind, and their campaign against violent extremists has been relatively successful, and they don't get a lot of on-the-ground help, though they do receive massive military aid from the US. Meanwhile, the Sahel has a long history of illicit trade, which has become tied to various terrorist groups in the area. So the reality is that eliminating illicit trade in the Sahel, which is historic, especially now with insurgents in action, seems more than a daunting task. Also, peace building and post-conflict resolution expertise is important to establishing peace and security wherever it may be in Africa. It's the UN, foreign governments, NGOs, and even some private companies, often contracted to agencies or organizations, that can bring this expertise and skills to host countries in conflict. Disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, anti-extremism, de-radicalization, religious tolerance, peace initiatives. It's all part of the program. But old tribal animosities die hard. It's a factor. It's an issue. While I've been discussing international regional organizations empowering capacities for peace and security and how it sometimes isn't that simple, there's a chance that many of you are thinking along the lines of the African Union, the UN, G5, SADC, Interpol, French, American, and British and other European nations providing what help they can. Yet, again, about nations making their own decisions as to what help they get and from whom. The most recent coup in Mali has reports that the coup leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, is looking to Russia and the Russian mercenary company Wagner Group to empower the country's peace and security. Perhaps because this new government is liable to be politically isolated, their best bet was to make a deal with the Russians, which will likely have Mali's leaders indebted to Moscow. There's some speculation that the coup was backed by the Russians even. And then there's China, which has been pumping resources and money into Africa as a whole, including the Sahel and into the G5 and its warfare effort, as well as the United Nations and the African Union and the Economic Community of West African States. China has some military in Mali ostensibly as a peacekeeping force. But what are China's interests in Mali? In July, Mali and China established a memorandum of understanding while China donated $9 million worth of weapons and equipment. In the end, there are several factors and variables to consider contextually and per situation, per region, per nation, per people, when we discuss any international regional organization's efforts to empowering whatever capacities for peace and security that exist or are to be created. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Royce de Melo, thank you very much. That was very enlightening. Like I said, I was just actually talking about the coup in Mali and wanted to know exactly what you just said. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Yeah.
Yes. And so at this time, that concludes this panel discussion. Are there any questions for any of the panelists today? We do have a few minutes, actually maybe 9 minutes to be exact, before we got to close out. So I'm going to look in the chat here, and I believe there was one. There's one earlier from Nazar. I think that was for Irfan, but Irfan is gone now. Is there any questions for Mr. Royce de Melo? It's always good to have you, Royce. We appreciate your time. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead
thank you.
Start closing us out. Go to the. I could share my screen. And so with that, folks, I just wanted to thank all of our participants today, especially the NATO Southern Hub, Major Cristian Aanei. I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much. And let the folks at your headquarters know we appreciate them as well. And we look forward. I know there have been 4 reports that are out that actually coincide with the NATO Southern Hub. And those are available. I think if you go to the NATO library, you can actually find some of those reports. And I just posted that link in our institute yesterday. We have a community right now of about 500, a little over 500 students who are interested in doing research and furthering the education in counterterrorism. So with folks like NATO and the UN and other organizations joining us, thank you again, Major. We appreciate your time. And with that, I'd like to thank Mr. Royce de Melo, Mr. Irfan Yar, and Dr. Kunle Olawunmi. And with that, I'd like to introduce the Global CT Institute, the Counterterrorism Curriculum Development, which is a program for national security strengthening. The vision of the Institute is an international one based on not just tactical. The majority of us may have operational experience, but many of us also have academic experience and are independent-minded. We are nonpartisan. We don't take sides. We look at promoting quality research and in-depth studies with the issues in terrorism, human security, cybersecurity, violence, and extremism, developed in an online educational institution. And our mission at the Institute is to shape intellectual discourse and impact education uniquely. And that was in the beginning was to develop an online educational curriculum in countering terror, violence, and extremism. We actually have a few of our students here today. They're actually taking courses. The objectives of the Institute is to conduct studies and research in national security. We've done that since in the APAC region with one study in one country in Indonesia, organizing and facilitating these courses, seminars, conferences, and research programs. We evaluate the factors affecting national security, similar to what the UN Counter-Terrorism Committee does and NATO. We look at the facts, we look at all the statistics and the data, and formulate the research and our findings. Most of the time, suggesting countermeasures is normally up to the country itself. And we also do that by curriculum development, because at the Institute, our motto is we know that guns can kill terrorists. We know that. But education can also be killed by terrorism, can also be killed by education. And we do that by promoting awareness and initiating public debate on the importance of human security, such as these panel discussions. Within our programs, we currently have a criminal justice program that was developed by Mr. Mohammed Omar and Irfan Yar, and Amber Oquindo, and an international security studies program that was developed by Dr. Kunle Olawunmi and Mr. Irfan Yar of the Afghan Security Institute. We also have an information technology program bootcamp that is formulating now and turning into a cybersecurity program next year. And we also have tertiary programs like English as a second language or basic Arabic in intelligence studies for specific learners. And so with that, I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance today. You can find us at globalctinstitute.org. We also have our community and our WICS community with several different groups that we invite all of our members to. So with that, I want to thank you very much. We do have a second event this afternoon, which starts at 12 o'clock, which is on anti-bribery and corruption. It is a certification coursework program. And if you're interested, the links and whatnot are on our WICS community. Plus, I've been sharing the promotions for that certificate. Any compliance regulatory institution will accept that certificate in anti-bribery and corruption. And you can join us here shortly. And with that, I'd like to close it out and thank everyone again for their time. Good evening.